All right, everyone, we're getting ready to go. Welcome to another episode of the Amusing Panda live stream, all about Warmachine and Hordes. This is your one-stop shop to learn anything about strategy and tactics in this game. We're joined today by the one and only Alex Cosma. Say hi, Alex. Actually, let's do it like this.
Hello. Oh man, I have some funny stories about being not the only one, the one and only Alex Cosma in the United States, but I'll save those for another time.
Well, I think I was the only fat Asian for a long time, and then America got
the only
obese,
one,
and then it's just not the case anymore. But I used to be unique. Yeah. All right, well, we're so glad everybody that's here that is here, and today Alex and I are going to be talking about winning the game of Warmachine, and we're going to start with a little bit of a unique angle. We're going to talk about how not to lose, because you can't really learn how to play if you die at the top of two. Like, there's just nothing you can do, right? We're also, I wanted to let you guys all know we're making a few changes to the show, just as we learn every week. Next week, I should have live chat right on the screen with us so that we can follow along the chat as we go. Alex is going to be joining very regularly. We haven't figured that out yet, but probably every weekish. So that's going to be great. We also have another person who's probably going to join a little later on, Danny, who we had a lot of fun with last week. And I don't know if anybody else wants to be a part of the show, but I'm looking for a producer. What I learned live streaming for the first time, well, I guess I have live streamed a few other things, but doing this show for the first time is that there's just too much cognitive load on me trying to manage everything that goes on to making sure the stream is switching scenes properly, talking about the subjects and everything else. So if you're interested in being involved in the show and want to be a producer, we'd love to have you. Or if you know somebody who just wants some experience or to hang out, or maybe just even talk with us about Warmachine, I'm down. So just reach out to me and we'll figure it out. Okay, Alex, was there any news that SFG put out recently that you think is worth talking about?
Well, we're in a bit of an odd spot for news because tomorrow's typically news day for Warmachine.
I know, right?
The one thing that did catch my eye is tickets for Lock and Load, the Iron Gauntlet, whatever it is now, in its ambiguous transformation, are now on sale. So the US one is going to be at Warfare Weekend. I think it's mid-November sometime. I didn't note down the dates, which I probably should have done before knowing I was going to bring this up. I think it's 14th through the 16th. Not a lot of details on the site other than that you can buy tickets.
Let me just look it up really quick. It's November 1st through 3rd. That
was the old one.
Oh, no, it's November 14th through 16th. You're absolutely right. Here, check this out.
Yeah. Warfare Weekend has not updated their site since the last con. Oh, they have now. Look at that.
Yep. Oh, why is this so zoomed? Oh, I know why this is zoomed in. Sorry, guys.
Yeah,
my bad.
It's for the other thing.
It's for the other thing we're doing, but November 14th through 16th, 2025. There, we got it. Oh man, I'm not good at this. All right, so we learned something new today. Cool. Let's get back to talking about Warmachine. Okay, so I guess we don't have too much news and announcements. Get your Warfare Weekend badge. Now, I've been out of the game for a little while, but for my money, when it was Warmachine Weekend and then it became Warfare Weekend, that was my favorite event of the year every year. It had the Invitational. A lot of people were there. It was close to home. I lived in Iowa. It was in St. Louis. So I think it was St. Louis. Pretty sure it was St. Louis. And it's well worth going. So if you're on the fence about going this year, I think you should really consider it. It's a great time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, Alex.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No. Go ahead. And I should have given you a little more room. So
just echoing the endorsement. It's sort of, actually, I've never heard of anyone doing it as their first con. But if you are newer to Warmachine and interested in discovering competition or just meeting, like-minded people, it's kind of a a crossroads meeting place for basically the entirety of the North American metagame, and then some ways beyond. So you'll encounter, a lot of the community experience, sort of the spirit of the game and the culture that we enjoy so much, and basically get to see the whole thing at once, which is pretty cool.
Actually, Alex, I'm going to sidetrack us for just a second because I think you said something there that I want to highlight for newer players, and that's the culture of the community, particularly the culture of the what I would call the competitive scene. You want to kick us off on kind of your thoughts on that? But I think it's a pretty unique culture.
Yeah. When people hear like competitive scene, a lot of times that evokes images of like really intense tryhardism, or people who are going to try and screw you over hard on the rules, or sort of an unpleasant or combative experience. One of the advantages of Warmachine is the approachability and cleanness of the rule system itself. So technical disputes are pretty rare, but also there's a culture of like, we're in this together to like improve and level up our game and demonstrate our best possible performance. Like we're tools to drive each other to greatness. And what that looks like is, really, really smooth tournaments, people just playing their best for the love of the game. And then like, as is often the case, like, getting to talk about the hobby they enjoy and like, hey, let's go out for dinner, let's grab beers, something like that. You could have just won or lost a hard top table game, against a absolutely like punishing opponent. And there's this attitude of, we're in this game together for the love of it and for making ourselves masters.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to point out, at least it's been my experience, and I don't know what it's like now because I haven't been to a big convention, but in my experience, the better the player, typically the better the sport in general. And then also, I think competing at miniature games is kind of weird. It's way too easy to cheat if you want to. Like, if you want to just win, people can cheat, and you can get away with, like, I mean, there's been community members, a few, not very many, that have been called out for, cheats per minute or whatever. So there's a social contract when you're playing a miniatures game. And I think inherently, I would say 95% of the community, most of the community just understands that. So you play by intent, you help each other out. You're like, I'm trying to measure this. So your opponent will grab their sticks and help you lay it out. And I think there's even times you're like, well, I'm just trying to figure out if I can get this model in this little hole that's over here. And you're like, wow, that's really close. And then you both work together to figure out if it's possible. Right. And that might seem counterintuitive to like winning the game, but most of the people that play this game, they want to win the right way. They just want to win by having a better strategy, not by having a gotcha. Or there's another thing that happens in miniature gaming where if you're more disagreeable, you can up your win percentage. I mean, that's just a fact. And it's unfortunate that's what happens in miniature games. But we tend to, well, in the past, again, gosh, I keep forgetting that I've been out of this thing for like 6 years, 7 years. Back in my day, get off my lawn. We used to name and shame people that were awful, right? Like we would just literally just like call them out. We would call them out on our show. We would call them out wherever and just be like, hey, you just can't act this way. And I think we'll continue that tradition.
Yeah. I would say my experience of the game is in the intervening 6 or 7 years remained very much true to that spirit. Something you mentioned, like the social contract, like a miniature game, the state of the game is maintained in a relationship of trust between the two players. If the game is worth playing at all, it's worth respecting that state of trust and respecting your opponent and working with them, because otherwise you're not playing Warmachine. You're playing something else, and it ain't the game as written.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Like, I think you nailed it. So anyway, join us in calling out people that are bad actors. I don't think there never was very many. There was never very many. And
very,
just,
very few. My firsthand experiences with them are like one hand, maybe I need to go to like another thumb over 22 years of playing.
yeah, that's about right. I will say, just as an aside too, I remember when I first saw Jake Van Meter at a convention. Okay, and this was 2010 at Daikon, I think. It's like in the middle of nowhere. And so I took it, and you guys maybe don't know this, but back in the day, Jake very much looked like a bro. Like, he had this like frat boy haircut, and he was ripped at the time, and I was just like, God, I'm gonna hate this guy so much. And I got him in a game, and he was just the sweetest guy ever while he was beating me silly. So it was just like one of those experiences where, like, I'm losing this game, and this guy is so nice and so sweet and so amazing. And then I met Chuck, who was also there, very much the same way. Well, he didn't look like a bro. He wasn't stacked, and he didn't have like a cool haircut, but or any hair at all. If you knew Chuck Ellswick.
Jake anyway, is still ripped. Chuck is like a quarter of the size he used to be.
Really? He lost a lot of weight?
No, yeah. The first time I saw, like, Warfare Weekend 2019. Hey, it's Chuck. 3 years pass. I go to a tournament in Indianapolis, and I actually have to hear his voice before I recognize him. Yeah. He went through a pretty tremendous weight loss journey.
Oh, good for him. That's amazing.
Same with Corey Doyle from up in Canada as well, if you remember him.
I do remember.
Turns out,
go ahead.
Turns out the some folks took advantage of the pandemic and made some pretty profound life changes.
That's fabulous. Hey, Dragorium, I'm glad you're here. If you want to jump on with us, there's room. So if you just message me on Facebook, I'll get you a link, and we're going to talk about Plan Don't Die in Warmachine. We'll see how that goes.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I guess I'll kick us off really quick. You're Alex. Sorry. See, this is the cognitive load of trying to manage everything. We want to talk about assassination. Basically, one of the first things you have to learn as a new player, and this is actually going to be a good review for even if you're an experienced player, because there's a lot of things you can do to reduce the chance of you dying. And the longer you last in the game, the more lessons you can learn. And I'm just going to share a side story. I was once talking to Trevor Christensen, and he had this habit of playing the first 2 or 3 turns during practice, and then he would rack again because he thought he knew how the game was going to go. So he and I played a game, I think it was at Lock and Load, and he was dominating me for the first 3 turns. Like, I really didn't have a shot. But in the end game, the game was a little different, right? And he had never really practiced playing the end game as much as he should have. And so I managed to squeak one out against him. And we talked about it after the game, and he was like, gosh, I wish I needed to understand what was going to happen at the end of the game so I could take my advantage and drive it home. So much the same way for you new players, returning players, people that are getting into Mark IV, if you can make the game go long, you will learn so many more lessons, and that will be very valuable for you as you're trying to climb the mountain. Alex, you want to jump in on that in any way?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Endgame broadly is the hardest part of the game to practice, because unlike chess, where you can do king versus king pawn, and work backwards on number of pieces from there, that's rather difficult to do in Warmachine, like simulating the attrition that leads to a display of fundamentals. Some small size games are good for it, but if you're like brand new to this game, Endgame is a bit of a ways off.
Right.
You see it in maybe 1 in 20 games, but as a new player, you're going to be dealing with a lot. So, unfamiliar models, if your opponent's army is new to you, continuing to develop your understanding of your models, and just making like mechanical execution errors, or, understanding threat ranges, understanding unpacking your army. What not losing will do for you in learning to win the game is exactly as you said, John, enable you to see more of the game.
That's That's exactly right.
And you'll learn more lessons every turn that you go through.
Yeah, and the game changes as you go. So if you get killed on 2 a lot, you've learned how to unpack your army, but you really haven't learned how to play the game, right?
Yep.
Okay, so one of the first things we want to talk about. So there's a couple ways you can lose right away. One is getting assassinated, and the other thing we're going to talk about is not losing on scenario right away, because you can also lose on scenario really quick in this game, and we'll go deep into that after we talk about assassinations. But Alex, what would you say is the number one way to protect your Warcaster in this game?
That is distance. Do not be where they can kill you.
That's right. So one of the things you can do is you can just, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, right? Because your Warcaster is the most powerful, best, or Warlock, best piece you have. Like it has all these spells. It has, its control range. It has focus that it can spend and do all kinds of cool stuff. And you were kind of talking about maybe taking it out of the game a little bit, or maybe making it a little more passive. So you can use your Warcaster to cast some buffs through an arc node maybe, or even just being 6 inches behind the things you buff before you send them forward. Totally fine too. But if you just play the distance game and you understand your opponent's threat ranges, having your caster safe and far away is the number one. Like if they can't get to you, if they don't have range to you, you can't die. It's literally impossible. So anything you want to add there, Alex?
Yeah. Not dying, incredibly important for exactly that reason. And I see a lot of people like prevaricating on like, oh, what if I move forward and shoot my hand cannon and stuff like that? Like, but you're maybe not necessarily thinking about all the different ranges. Arc nodes, particularly for channeling spells, complicate things because a lot of casters will fold to a few decent powered, like direct hits. If nothing jumps out at you at like, my caster needs to do this or I will lose the game, probably your best option is like, I'm going to throw my buffs up and I am going to run to safety. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just going to add, running to safety. The better part of Valor is living to see the next turn, right? Mm-hmm. I know we're kind of reiterating ourselves here, but it's totally okay for you to have sort of a passive turn with your Warcasters. And if you watch some VODs of people playing the game, you'll see a lot of times Warcasters aren't doing a lot in the first 3 or 4 turns of the game. And what'll happen is somebody will be forced to bring their king, or in this case, their queen, out and to make it active in order to make up a deficit that they have. Maybe they're behind on a scenario or they're behind on attrition, and they feel like they have to get some more juice out of their Warcaster, so they'll bring them into the fray. You just have go ahead. Being assassinated is usually a result of 2 things: 1, error, or 2, desperation. Either desperation on your part because you need to remake parity, or desperation on your opponent's part because you've left them no other option. And there are some casters like Major Anson Wolf, where when he hits the table, he's usually in a slam dunk. Wolf's main job is pop feed on turn 2 or 3, and then the rest of the game, it's don't die.
Yeah, I feel the same way with Helith, actually. Let's check.
Oh, super duper.
Yeah, let's check the chat really quick here. I think Gregorium has a pretty fair point. Horus does not play a fair game. I think what he's getting at is Horus has this ability where he can spend 1 focus to re-roll any roll, and he's got like a 14-inch control, and it's any model in his control. So he could basically just be very active in the game in a very passive position. Like, I mean, he could also bring sword to face. Don't get me wrong, that guy hits like a truck, but he can be a little more active than most casters throughout the game. It's one of the things that makes him such a highly competitive caster, is he's just that reroll is like a feat every turn. It's ridiculous. So
be wary of any Orgoth player who brings an Arc Node Jackal with Horus. You might be in for a bad time, which we'll come to in a minute with some of our later topics. But what about camp, I guess, is the next defensive measure that most people have at their fingertips?
Well, sometimes you don't have the option to do distance, right? Like there's no place to hide. I mean, there is kill box in most scenarios. Giving up to scenario points is a quick way to lose, like it just is. So one of the best things you can do is just not spend your focus in camp, which is boring, or not spend your fury, I guess. It's super boring, but it changes the odds of you surviving to be a lot higher. And one of the things I wanted to touch on, Alex, really quick, and I'd like you to expound on this, is you don't have to make your caster 100% safe. What I will say, though, is the better the player you're playing against, the less safe you can be with your caster. And what I mean by that is, if you give somebody a 27% chance of killing your caster and they're a good player and they recognize that it's not really 3/4 of the time I don't get it, like they're not going to go for it, right? Unless you give it to them without it costing them a lot. So that's the other part of that equation. But the big thing is your caster doesn't have to be 100% safe. You just have to make it so that it doesn't look good, right? It doesn't look good, with the caveat of sometimes you're playing somebody that will just go for it because that's their personality. And you know, if you gave them a 25% chance, 1 in 4 times you lose the game, right? So that's, you have to be a little careful with that. But
yeah, there's some good rule of thumb math that goes into that. You know, because casters have very good generally defense natively. The main thing that can make an assassination be technically on but look unappealing is the math of missing. So, you know, say you can sling some boosted hit, boosted damage gunshots at a caster who's like 16, 14, 16 boxes. You know, every shot that you have has, you know, if you're boosting, you know, factor, like assume base rat 6, you're at about a 50% miss rate, more or less. And then, you know, your damage is usually dice off some, and like, you know, I have 4 gunshots on this 16, 15 caster. Like, I might kill them, you know, but, you know, half my gunshots are going to miss. And, you know, the damage rolls, like, you know, say I'm dice -2 at like POW 13s, that totals up to 16 damage on average. I might kill them, but that's another like 50% shave or a couple of coin flips. And it's like, my odds aren't looking so hot now.
Right. And then in that same situation, if you're a warcaster and you're camping and you just have one focus, it makes that math a lot worse, right?
Yeah, because you have 21 hit points instead of you know, 16. And right. By the way, like, I know not everyone is going to agree with this, but the primary way I teach people to think about camping focus on warcasters versus camping fury on warlocks, which is that attack didn't exist. The best way to think of it on warcasters is not I spend a focus to gain +5 armor, because you're doing it subjectively against things that break armor by a certain margin. It's essentially like, assume your caster for every focus has 5 more hit points. That'll give you a much more realistic expectation of what your survivability is going to turn out to be. There are edge cases like death by 1,000 cuts, or just a couple of ultra high power attacks that put you in the dirt. But in general, 5 extra hit points is the better heuristic, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then we should probably talk about warlocks for a second. When they camp, like he said, you don't make the damage go away. It goes to one of your war beasts, but you take 0 damage. It doesn't matter how big a hit it is.
Yep.
So the nice thing about both camping focus and fury is that you decide when you spend it. So in our example of the 4 attacks, right? Let's say he rolls 2 damage. You don't have to spend your focus on that. You can just take the 2 damage. You know what I mean? Like, whatever. And you don't care. Because, you know, there's like a certain element of ruin in every assassination, having seen many of them go wrong. And the big trick with making it look unappealing is like you said, if you can keep your defense up, or you can add to your defense, like standing in a trench behind a wall, even in concealment, all these things can make a big difference, which we'll talk about more. But camping changes the math on so many assassinations. You don't have to like camp 6 focus. You can literally camp like 3, and 3 will change the math enough in a lot of situations where they're just like, okay, I can't go for this because I've got a 50-50 on getting it, but then I've used a lot of resources on not advancing the game, right? I put some damage on your caster, but until your caster hits 0, damage on your caster doesn't mean anything. I mean, it's like a resource you can spend. You can ask any Harvey players from Mark II, right? Or Mark, I guess Mark III too. Anything else?
I guess last note on camp, and this is maybe a bit more advanced, but your caster can absolutely be in a point where your opponent can get attacks on you, but it may not be worth their while to go for it. I think often, if you were coming up in this game between, I'd say like 2012 and maybe at 2017 on the top end, a lot of your early losses are going to be to assassination, because you just don't know the risks, and you get punished for standing somewhere you shouldn't, that you didn't know you shouldn't. Nowadays, I think you will find if you're coming up in an environment of players, who've been around the block a few times and maybe even travel and, have some muscles on them, they will often decline assassinations fairly regularly because they're very good at assessing when it's not worth their time. That said, this may lead to a false sense of security for your caster that shouldn't be there. And actually, like, as a veteran player, if you've got a newbie who puts his caster somewhere that caster has no business doing, if you're on like turn 2, just kill him and show him what's up, and then offer to re-rack, because you're going to give them a valuable experience in both directions.
Yeah, and I mean that's what we're trying to avoid for newer players, right? Again, maybe you shouldn't be standing there. We'll talk about positioning here in a little bit. We'll bring up War Table and really dig into it. I guess I want to talk about a comment really quick. Charlie Foster says, "Arm 25, baby." Yes, if your caster is Arm 25, you're in pretty good shape. You're probably not going to die. Very difficult. It can happen. I mean, this is Warmachine. Arm 25 is not immortal, but it can definitely happen. So, all right. I guess the only other thing I would say about assassinations, and I think I made this point, but I just want to make it really crystal clear, is different times in the game, there is a little different math to do. Early game, when there's a lot of your models on the table and there's no clear leader, there's nobody who's winning in attrition or winning in scenario, they're less likely to go for an assassination unless it's really good. Like I would say I probably wouldn't go for it unless it was like 90% plus, because I feel very confident that I can play the game for scenario and attrition and have a better chance to win, which is maybe obnoxious, right? Then that 90% is maybe a little high. Maybe it should be like 80. But if you're playing against a new player and you put your caster out there, they might only have a 20% chance to win, but they might not understand all the factors that go into it. So they go for it anyway, right? And the only other thing I would say is, as the game progresses, it becomes apparent who's winning, who's on a path to victory, and then you have to be way more careful, because if you're winning, you be more careful with your caster, and if you're losing, you'd be less. I guess that's a general rule how I would put it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
All right, let's talk about positioning. Let's see if I screwed this up. It's entirely possible.
Go OBS magic.
Yeah, I was so proud of myself earlier too. You can ask Alex. I was like, I got this all figured out. Okay.
Oh, look at that. It worked.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a pretty typical map you can see here for Warmachine. We've got some blocking terrain here. We've got burning dense fog, this red stuff right in the middle, this forest right in the middle. Pretty typical to see some blocking terrain in the middle of the table. Otherwise, guns kind of dominate the game. So most of your TOs will make sure that there's some safe places to hide. Alex, are you in this game as well or no?
No, yeah, I'm right there with you. I got it pulled up on my screen too.
Okay, so you can absolutely do this. But like here is Helith, right? And let's say it's middle of the game and I put her right here. And I don't know, can I zoom in a little bit? Can probably position her a little better. I would probably do something like this. So now you can see you've got pretty good line of sight blocking. If we zoom out a little bit, you know, somebody could shoot you from over here. And it looks to me like over here. Well, you guys probably can't see my mouse on the screen. Let's see here. You could probably get shot from, if you measure the line from the base here, over here, and over here-ish. They would have to get models to be able to shoot you.
Yeah, I'll grab some red team and show it off. So we've got like this guy can kind of just see around the corner.
Yep.
Versus this guy, if he's over here, like no chance whatsoever.
Yep. Oh, is that how you use? I need to learn how to use a war table. Well, good thing you're here, Alex. So I mean, that's like a pretty simple thing you can do, right? The other thing you can do that's kind of interesting is you can use like an 80 millimeter. And let's say you wanted to, like, say all your jacks got killed and you wanted to score this because you cleared it. So you could build a pretty cool fort here. Something like this. So you've blocked line of sight. You can see here. Oh, wow. So you can see here, this line of sight is blocked, and then you also have a pretty good line over here, and I've got to move her up if you want to score this, so she's got to be like right here. Oh, yeah. All right. So what you can see, and if we zoom out a little bit, now it's very difficult to get a line on Lilith here, and she's scoring this objective, right? Like this forest now blocks over here. So she's got the benefit of this forest and this little nook created. Now this 80 millimeter can get killed. But, you know, if this is a bison in this case, it's like armor 19, 24 boxes or something. So requires a pretty significant investment on your opponent's part. But again, this allows you to be a little more aggressive with your caster. I would say she is relatively safe here. What do you think, Alex?
I think so. So that's why I put the Maelstrom up over in this corner. So, you know, say this objective is being scored by this Colossal over here. You know, I don't have good, clean line of sight to Helith anywhere here. Actually, let's put him back over here because this is like a great example of, you know, being attentive to your defensive bunker. So not only is the Bison blocking line of sight heavily this way, you know, you're also using your models to jointly block line of sight with other terrain you're not even necessarily touching. But yeah, that's a super safe place to be, because you've essentially added this massive high armor, you know, high boxes solo that needs to be got through before damage rolls can even be put on Helith. And like, say you're a Storm Legion player, you know, you can run a similar thing over here with like a Colossal. Like, there's basically no chance anyone's getting to you.
Yeah. Here, I want to show another thing you can do. Like, if you do play a Colossal, now I don't play these 120 millimeter bases all that often, if I'm being honest. But something like this is pretty safe early game. You know what I mean? Like, they have to get pretty deep to get to you in a lot of cases.
You might want to scoot your screen off to the right.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Good call. Maybe. There we go.
There we go.
Yeah. And if you tuck up a little bit, you can even make it a little safer. And what you can do is you can kind of swing her around, you know, depending on what you want to do. Like, let's say this was like here. You could position so that you're here in a trench, which greatly affects your safety. And if you look at the lines, a lot of the lines that you can draw also kind of hit these forests. Let's see if I can show that. But now you've put your caster in a trench. You've blocked off a lot of the places where they could draw a line of sight to you. And, you're in a pretty safe place.
Right. Yeah, even objectively speaking, like just being behind a huge base doesn't, on its own necessarily grant you a lot of survivability. But if I've got a heavy warjack with like an 11-inch threat range, Helith's pretty comfortably inside that. But just the amount of like raw movement obstruction, or how far radically off to the side I have to stand to begin to get line of sight, to, henpeck at you with guns. Even before the trench, that's a pretty inaccessible position. And
Yep.
this networks and gets better the more of your models you have on your side. You can essentially construct like, even if the terrain is not helping you out, you can construct a Red Rover line of your own guys for your caster to live inside.
Okay, now here's something I want to make a point about positioning that's really important. Slams are a thing, right? So using a colossal or an 80 millimeter base is probably good. If you're gonna use large warjacks, let me show you a pretty cool little thing that I do all the time. Where are you? There is a way that you can position these to make you immune to the slams and still block line of sight. So I'm going to zoom in because this is a little bit technical. Well, I'm going to try to zoom in. Here we go. Okay. So you want to be placed right here, right up to the edge. And then this guy is placed right here like this. And what you've created here, let me see if I can take these off. If this model with the X on it gets slammed in any direction that would hit your caster, it hits this other base first, the base with the box around it, right? If the model, I didn't quite get this position how I wanted. This should be just a little bit like that. There we go. And again, you're pretty safe because you've got line of sight blocked, right? And you just got to make sure that if this model gets slammed, because it can be slammed directly away, but there has to be no path here across your base, right? If this model here that has the box around it, if it gets slammed, it runs into the model with the X on it. You see what I'm saying? So now you're in a place where you've got line of sight blocked. There's no range slam that can be slammed into your model, and you've kind of created a bunker, and this bunker can be placed anywhere. And you block a lot of line of sight with these two large bases. Like, it's very difficult. You can position this in any way you want. You know what I mean? Like, you can flip it over to the other side. You can use distance. Does that make sense, Alex?
It does. I think we should take this as a segue to roll into the next point. I think there's various, like micro niches we could cover when dealing with terrain, but I think our advice from the last episode stands, which is read the rule book. You read the rule book, you're familiar with the with the rules on terrain, or if you're not, you will become very rapidly. The next section is crucial questions to understand what really threatens your safety, and sort of why it's worth prevaricating about slams so much. When I preferred my hypothetical about, okay, you can be a bit dicey with your caster, but it's not really on just based on the dice risks. Most casters do lean into their defense to say, even if you're boosting, you have about a 50% fail rate. So you essentially need to double your number of attacks to be like on even to expect to get it done, even if the damage is all there. Most casters lean on their defense. Slams, throws, and other similar effects can cause another model to move, usually with significantly lower defense, and take your defense completely out of the equation.
You become
prevaricating
defense 5,
about,
right?
yeah,
So,
prevaricating about this sort of situation is a question that, as you learn and grow, you should be asking, okay, I've got a tough caster, I'm blocking line of sight, I'm high defense. but there are some rules that are specifically made to screw me over in this situation. What am I going to do about them to make sure I'm safe? Okay, distance is number one for sure. Then it's, well, just be somewhere that they can't get at you, even if you're, in like, or rather make your numbers bad enough that it's not worth getting at you, then be somewhere where their range works to get at you, but the situation doesn't, either through models or through terrain. But in order to make that be somewhere where they can't get to me, you have to be conscious of some situations that can change the table state. So, John, why don't you take us through the list of questions a new player should be asking when committing to a bunker?
Yeah, so what you can do, and most opponents will give you this information, you can just ask, hey, do you have any ranged slams, that you can throw at me? So the things that can be done, there's spells, like the one Horask has. What is it? Thunderstrike, I think. Force Hammer is another one where it's got like a range 8 or a range 10. An arc node can run 11 inches or so, and then arc it like 8 inches. So like a 19-inch threat range to hit the model in front of you and slam the model right over your caster, knocking them down. So the way that works, we'll just go through this really quick. Let's say...
Oh, I got an example coming up for you right away.
Okay, yeah, knock it out.
All right, so we got some... let's say you are not as precise as John was just there, and you're like, oh yeah, I've got my Eidolons here blocking off Helith. I should be safe. Wolf is all the way back here, like he's outside 16 inches of my caster. There's not good sidestep targets for him or anything like that. But Wolf just walks forward 6. 16 is a bad example because Wolf has Energizer, but like Wolf walks forward 6, throws a Force Hammer. Oops, you weren't careful with your bunker. This Jack slams at least 1 inch, and then Helith becomes knocked down. And suddenly, this Maelstrom can just come strolling in and fire away to its heart's content.
Oh, I guess I should allow the Maelstrom to be seen on the screen. Okay, guys, yeah. Technical difficulties, but...
Another example. Let's suppose Wolf is all the way off screen, but we got this courser. John was far more careful in his setup this time. Far more meticulous. We'll just assume that's at 0 inches. But if this... But actually, the perfect bunker does kind of deny it. But you have to be wary of vectors your opponent can get that are not immediately obvious where this suddenly becomes on. And it's worth asking questions about, okay, do you have slams? Do you have arc nodes? Do you have throws you can do at range?
Yeah. And yeah, so those things are good, right? Like we agree on all that. But the other thing that's kind of interesting is it doesn't have to be a range slam. So Khador has a jack called the Avalanche, which Khador has a lot of ways, or Wintercore, I should say, has a lot of ways to speed up their jacks. They've got a Vegging Force for 3 inches of extra movement, Superiority for plus 2 inches of extra movement. The Avalanche has Fleet for plus 2 inches of extra movement. You add all that up together, and you can get like a 16 or 17-inch slam, I think, right? Something like that with the Avalanche.
Yep.
And so if you're standing behind your big jack and that Avalanche comes from downtown, and I'm talking down 17 inches is a long ways away, and slams you right over, and even if they only slam it an inch, because of the way disturbance works, sometimes your model will just be placed to the side, and suddenly, the jack is knocked down, and you're knocked down, and all the guns can train on you, and maybe some charges from other stuff too, and then you just die. Like you're just, okay, cool. Let's rack it again.
Yep. Exactly.
Other things you can ask are, do you have any way to make me stationary? Right? There is a Khador solo that nobody plays that's got a 10-inch spray that has freeze on it. Now it's only Rat 5, so that is something. But if you get hit with like a 10-inch spray is very hard to defend against. You can't shield guard it, which again, reminder, shield guard is the thing that takes a shot for you. So like it's hard to hide from a 6-inch move in a 10-inch spray, or a 5-inch move in a 10-inch spray. And if you get made stationary, it's exactly
Lucky
the same
for you,
as
it's a 4-inch. It's a 4-inch move in a 10-inch spray because Winter Core has some sad sack stats sometimes.
Oh yeah, it's a Man of War, right? So fair enough.
Yeah.
Man of War.
It's worth noting though that the controller is upgraded to Rat 6, and just like with the Siege Terrask and Orgoth, you can kind of do some number exploits. Like, yeah, it's Rat 6, but I've got Signs and Portents and a reroll. So you want to try your luck?
Yeah, and again, if that happens, it's the Kobayashi Marusa. That's right. Like you're not getting out of that. If your caster gets frozen or knocked down and they have some attacks to make, you're probably not surviving it, barring incredible luck.
Yeah, effects like Stationary, Shadowbind, and Blind are some of the main ways to, do similar to what Knockdown does. These effects are generally much more exotic. And, not necessarily a lot of pieces have these rules or have these rules that you will see in a way consistently. But it's worth asking about if you're trying to assess whether where you're committing to or how you're structuring your bunker is a safe place to be.
Absolutely. All right, Alex, I'm going to put you on the clock to demonstrate this, but nonlinear movement can get you too, right? A really good example of that is Vilcool, right? Because they've got Cyclone, Avenging Force. So you can have a 3-inch move and then a charge and then a Cyclone, or, in any order, a 3-inch move and then a Cyclone and then a charge. Where do you want me to put the caster? Just where she is?
Oh, I got her all the way over here. So like, let's see. Yeah, so we've got Vilcool up here and Helith down here. Vilcool doesn't have direct line of sight to Helith from where she's standing. Like, can't see around that jack. But Vilcool has a number, my ideal situation here is I want to charge Helith and just kill her because say she's on 0 focus and we're going to get this job done. She's fired a few life trader shots. Helith players like, haha, I have my cleverly constructed bunker. Vilcool casts Cyclone and moves 6 inches. She's also got Pathfinder, so she can just bypass all this nonsense.
Well, she probably had a 3-inch move from Avenging, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. So we'll put her back here. So she takes a 3-inch move from Avenging Force, comes over here, casts Cyclone, comes all the way down here, and then she is comfortably in range to just get into Helith's grill.
Right. So yeah, non-linear movement is what makes that happen, because charges, just as a reminder, have to go in a straight line, just like you see that white highlight when you move a model on these things. That shows you your charge lane, and that has to be clear. You can't go through other models unless you have Ghost Walk or Flight. As everything in Warmachine always has an exception. Sorry, everyone. I know that's part of the fun of the game, though, and why it's such a mountain to climb for learning. But yeah, and so nonlinear movement is just it. And again, it's really simple. You just ask your opponents about nonlinear movement, range slams, and things that make you stationary or shadowbind or whatever. It's not an exhaustive list, and they'll usually go through it with you. They'll just be like, yeah, I can do this, I can do this. And you can ask them about the ranges and what the threat ranges are, just so you understand it. And then just put that information as a reminder while you're moving your caster, like, how do I keep them safe? And then the last thing that I put on the list is just to be aware of long-range sprays. So particularly in Storm Legion, where you really see this, you get a Maelstrom with like a 6-inch move and a 15-inch spray or something like that. Is that right?
Something like that.
It's pretty close. With Snipe makes sprays go longer, right? Coursers have a 12-inch spray, so they become 15 inches with Snipe. And again, line of sight doesn't protect you. Terrain doesn't protect you from sprays. So if they can get enough sprays on your caster, and it does take some volume of them, right? Like, especially if you camp. But like 3 sprays can kill you with good dice. And it's just something you have to be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sprays bypass a lot of very common defensive technology, and it's worthwhile just being extra cognizant of them. This is actually sort of my wheelhouse because while playing Storm Legion, I like to run me a list with 4 coursers with sprays. This is a real good defensive bunker that Helith is sitting in here. Because she's got shield guard, she's got line of sight blocks. Except these coursers can kind of just go wherever in this configuration, and this one shoots at this Eidolon, or this one moves over here and shoots Helith directly. This guy's also going to move over here and shoot at a Soulless Guardian that gives me a line that crosses Helith. And none of those Soulless Guardians can shield guard and pull those shots. So just being conscientious of attack types. And even if Helith's sitting over here, I'm defense 19 in this trench. Coursers walk up and I don't care about cover.
Yeah. Sprays ignore everything except elevation. So if you're playing against a lot of sprays and there's a hill, that is something that can help. You can build your bunker on a hill. Just something to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Last part I want to talk about in stopping. I'm gonna dub this plan don't die. Right? We're executing plan don't die. And if you don't die, you get to learn about the game and you get to play the game, which is what we're trying to accomplish, right? Is list design. There are things you can do in your list to allow you to build better bunkers, to allow you to be safer with your caster. And if you're a degenerate like me, I love running low defense or low defensive stat casters in the middle of the table. I've just done that my entire career. My career as a non-professional Warmachine player. I don't know. Never mind. So yeah, there's things that you can put in your list. Alex, do you have any favorites that you like to include for caster protection and when you need it?
Yeah, for caster protection. I mean, if I'm honest, the factions I've been playing lately are pretty anemic for options to protect yourself unless you go out of your way to put them in. Playing Storm Legion, actually, the Courser is one of my favorites because the Jack does a lot of work on its own, but it's also very easy to spec it into being a shield guard. It's tanky, so it can take multiple hits over the course of a game. Other things to look for are
and you would take a Courser anyway, right?
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, it's a repenter on steroids, which was my favorite light Jack for Protectorate back in the day. So
mine too. Yeah, that's a good one. Another curious one is the Zephyr, so 80 millimeter based model, just like the Bison. Particularly in conjunction with some shield guards, it lets you create a defensive bunker very, very quickly that's very hard to bypass when you're protecting a small base caster. So that's, just a couple of considerations. Otherwise, if I know I'm going to be facing shooting based offense as a main threat to my caster, just generalized defensive buffs against that. If your faction has an armor buff that can go on warcasters, it's often a good move, especially as you progress deeper and deeper into the game to Wolf's popped his feet and all my models have done all their things. My cavalry is connected. I'm going to stop upkeeping Arcane Shield on my cavalry, and Wolf's going to put it on himself and, go hide in the little security bunker. So you'll often have rack options or just general options that you will use for a primary purpose, and you want to be attentive to when you can use them for personal security as well.
Yeah, I will tell you, when I play Helith, it's turn 1, inviolable resolve on myself. Why? Because I can't be knocked down. Helith only survives on her defense. I mean, she's got 15 armor and 15 boxes. If she gets hit, she can get killed by blast damage, very easily. A couple Bisons can tune her up. You know what I mean? They can. So that's great advice, using the rack as a way to help protect yourself. You can also look for corner case rules. I know that, for example, was it the Direwolf? Warjack has anchor or lash.
Oh,
or
yeah,
something?
if you use a plow shield. Yeah, so he'll prevent knockdown if you're base to base with him. And Oh no, he just has anchor natively, and then if you
Yeah,
have the
he
plow
does.
shield, he also has girded, so he gives you blast resistance.
Yeah, so you can put stuff like that into your lists and make sure that that piece also serves another function, because its only job is not to protect you. It is to do its job and add a layer of protection so that when you need it, you have it available. Not that you use it every game, but it's just there. Other things I like to think about, a spell immune model can be a really good foil. Somebody who wants to like do a range slam with a spell on you, like you can use a spell like for example, Eidolons. There is a way to give them spell immunity. You can do exorcism on them, which is I think a seeker action, but it might be the guy with the wrench.
It's a seeker adept action.
Yep. And again, now the range slam is off the table, right? Because my jack can't be targeted by a spell. You can even put in like a random the charnel guy, right? Just to give you
Mulgreth,
yeah, Mulgreth. Just to give you a random spell immune line of sight blocker that you can use with terrain, and he can't be range slammed by a spell. I mean, it's not something that's pretty corner case, but it's random spell immunity can really thwart a lot of assassinations if you just happen to have the tool and it didn't cost you a lot to put it in the list, right? Obviously, Spell Vortex is very powerful for that. That's a pretty rare ability, but one of my favorites. And then we talked about the 80 millimeter bases and the 120 millimeter bases. It's just like a mobile bunker. Like it's just mobile cover that you can use just to block line of sight, because they block a big swath. Now, you have to like be cognizant of terrain, angles that your models can move, but you'll get good at it. Like you'll get an eye for it. Like we talked about in the last episode about how you had to develop that carpenter's eye in order to play Mark II. But just playing the game and experience it, muscle memory will take over, and you'll just like sort of naturally build good bunkers without thinking about it for your casters.
Right. And, returning to point number one, the best defense is distance. You don't have to have carpenter's eye anymore. Plus, the culture of the game is such that, you and your opponent both want to have a good game. If you ask your opponent about what they can do in terms of ranges, in terms of ability to extend their ranges, John's list of questions to determine if your hiding spot is safe, you've got a partner in helping figure that out. Don't overlook it, and don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, and it's okay to ask, because I mean, not everybody thinks this way, but most people think this way, which is, I want to beat you with my strategy over your strategy, with my tactics over your tactics, not with, I'm sorry you didn't know that and I got you because, surprise. That's not a very fulfilling way to win the game, and it's not what I would call a beautiful game. So I'll probably not be as competitive in this version of the game as I was in Mark II, because I just played a ton. But I will give people hard games because I like to think about the game, and I have good habits. I know how to play scenario. I just probably won't get as many reps. And I guess the point I was trying to make, what was the point I was trying to make? Anyway, it doesn't really matter. At this point, I just want you guys to understand that, like, oh, that's it. I want to play a beautiful game. I just want to enjoy the game. I want to burn my noodle while I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to untie the knot that you put me in. Or even more fun for me is tying that knot. I love creating situations and playing the game within the game with people and just being like, okay, cool. Here you go. Figure it out. I have all these stacking buffs and synergies, and I just, for example, playing Hazaroth, having that heal on demand to stop a model that's maybe blocking a charge lane. Like, there's a lot you can do with those kinds of abilities that people aren't used to playing around, which is just fun for me, right? So anyway.
Right, you get to put them in the puzzle box.
Yeah, I would say that's my style. What would you say your style is, Alex?
Oh gosh. Well, Muse on Minis was very formative on me back in the day, and I've taken seriously Musashi's advice, don't have a favorite weapon, but also Nigel's advice, your play style is just how you like to lose. But
That's pretty true.
It for me has very much become God, there's a great chess player whose name I am failing to remember, but he has a quote about essentially creating a confusing mid game, like lead your opponent into a deep dark wood where 2 + 2 = 5 and the road out is only wide enough for 1. Create an uncertain, chaotic mid game, which is difficult to anticipate and predict.
Yeah, I guess that just I'm gonna tangent for just a second too. That's another reason why sometimes playing not the accepted best thing can be a real advantage, because if you get a lot of reps with a caster, or even just some, and nobody plays that caster, they don't have reps into you, you have an inherent advantage. Now, whether that advantage overcomes the inherent disparity in the power levels of the models that you're talking about, that's up for debate depending on who you're talking about, right? But
yeah,
I love taking something that is unloved and playing with it and figuring out how to make it good. And then it's for me, this says a little bit about me, I guess, but it's very satisfying for me to beat somebody with something that is considered bad. I really enjoy that. I mean, it's probably that's what I enjoy in the game. Like I said, it probably says something about me, but
I have an exact illustrating principle of this idea. There's another player, Brandon Owens, who is one of the greats at this game. And he pioneered Crucible Guard into, just list refinement, strategy, etc., into being an exceedingly dominating force on the game in 2022. Like, Crucible Guard in the 2022 season was the great oppressor, and Brandon was at the forefront of it. We're getting ready for WTC. Brandon and I are on different teams. We're talking about team composition, and he recommends that my team pick up a Crucible Guard player. I had the flexibility to do it, so I was leaning into Crucible Guard. I was borrowing models and, buying into the faction myself. I played against Brandon dozens of times, so I was very fluent with the faction. And Brandon pioneered an incredibly meticulous and precise way of playing, where, like, this model goes exactly here and does this and repositions away. And, just like edging out like this very micro thing, which is kind of antithetical to the way I like to play the game. I recognized it was objectively superior, but partway through the season, I'm like, I talked to my team, like, I just got to push the eject button on this. Like, we've got 4 months to WTC. I can be good enough with this to, to go and play like well, but if I have to do 4 more months, I am not going to want to play the game anymore when we show up there.
Fair enough. Okay, so hopefully we've covered keeping your caster alive enough to where you got some good ideas. Actually, having War Table available for these kind of discussions is super valuable. I think it really shows off what this medium can be for illustrating game concepts. So I was pretty happy with that. All right, Alex, let's talk about scenario play. Why don't you go through how scoring works and how and when scoring happens, so we can sort of give a framework for not losing on scenario on, bottom of 3, top of 4.
Yep. So basic primer for the way scenario has changed shape a lot in this game over time. The way it works right now is there are a number of objectives on the table. They have a base size. You can't stand on them. They're only scored by certain model types. 50 millimeter objectives only scored by jacks and battle engines. So big guys score big guys. 40 millimeter objectives scored by units. And then there are a couple of sets of 30 millimeter objectives. On this board, we have flags, which are scored. They'll typically go onto a terrain piece most of the time. And then they're scored by 2 models being inside that terrain piece if you can stand in it, or 2 models within 3 inches if you can't stand in it. There's caches, which are small bases that get picked up by somebody forfeiting combat action. We don't have any on this board. And then, that's actually it right now. It's just the 4. But most of what you're going to see is 50 millimeters and 40 millimeters, and then flags and caches will play supporting roles in most of the scenarios. Every scenario has its own distribution of points that's scored by different objectives and how they score. It's really, really worth, like, if you sit down to a game with a scenario, I've been playing this game for ages. I still reread the scenario every time before I start, just to be sure. But the way scoring works is you have all these different elements that will score you points if you control them and your opponent doesn't. And scoring starts on the second player's second turn. So first player goes, they move their models. Second player goes, they react, move their models. First player goes, often, attempts to attack their opponent. Maybe you'll get an alpha strike. But the second player, even if he got alpha struck, has the first opportunity to score. The game ends when you have 3 more points than your opponents on their turn. And every objective scores every turn. So we can be all over these 50s in the middle. Say there's nobody in here contesting this. John's got a 50. I've got a 50. Both these 50s score regardless of whose turn it is and regardless of who's occupying them. We could even be crisscrossed like this and, we'd still score every turn.
Yep.
One last comment to make about this. And I know we've said earlier the end game generally tends to be a fairly advanced concept. It's worth remembering that not only does the second player get the first opportunity to score, every scenario lasts only seven rounds. So the second player also gets the last opportunity to score. And to have points is the first tiebreaker at the end of the game.
Okay, and I just want to point this out. The way the game sort of flows is you play your whole turn and then you score. Then your opponent plays their whole turn and then they score. So the situation you see, and this is just a quick dirty observation. We talked about Alex has got a jack over here, and I've got a jack by the blue objective. He's got a jack by the red objective, and it's now the end of my turn. And I take one of this unit of guys down here, and I run them here. So then on my turn, at the end of my turn, I score this. And then this model prevents Alex from scoring this because it's now contested, right?
Yep.
Right. And then Alex on his turn, he comes up and he kills this model. So this guy's dead. And then he runs his guy over here to contest this objective. And that's kind of how the flow of the game works when it's at equilibrium, which is I clear the objectives that I'm going to score on my turn and I score them, and I contest your objectives hopefully well enough that you make a mistake or dice go bad or something goes wrong or you're unable to clear it to create an imbalance in the game, which is the I score, you score, I score, you score, I score, you score. It's I score, right? 2 times in a row, and that's kind of how you win on scenario. Does that make sense?
Right. I mean, it makes sense to me, but we don't have a brand new apprentice here. Like, you following all that, Brick?
Yeah. And so the way you lose on scenario is you forget to score one of your objectives. Like you just had to move a model. You know what I mean? Or you deploy in a way where you can't get to all the objectives and meaningfully interact with them. So you just give free rein to your opponent to kind of score his. So not having a good plan from the beginning. Is there anything you want to say, Alex, about just in general about how scenario is played?
Yeah. Just to mention that, in past epochs of the game, your primary worry as a new player would be getting assassinated just all the time because you're tripping over your own toes and you don't necessarily know where is safe to stand. Even at an experienced player's level right now, I would say Warmachine is extremely scenario forward, in that scenario tends to be the the win condition you should plan around primarily. It's more achievable than baiting a caster into standing in a bad place. And you only need to manage a limited set of the engagement to win on scenario. So I'll give an example. We've been focusing very much on the center, but let's go ahead and pop over to the left-hand side. And I'm just gonna, loosey-goosey some models in to display something that is often how many scenarios are won. So say we've got the Clash of the Titans in the center. All our heavies are fighting like madmen. But over on this one flank, this big skirmishing element, this Sky Raider or Sky Bomber clears out, I've got heavy warjacks thrown into the grinder on the center, and I commit one courser to this side to go and stop these Guardians from scoring this 40 millimeter objective. Sky Raider comes over, blows up the courser. Courser's out of here. The Sky Raider's now free to go over here and contribute, but I essentially have no more models that I can contribute to this left-hand objective unless I start pulling my heavy warjacks out of the Clash of the Titans. Essentially, and I may not even be able to contest it right away because John has, dealt with my peripheral forces that aren't necessarily concerned with like the main thrust of the battle where the heavy warjacks are rolling dice at each other. He's got a scenario objective that's going to score on my turn and his. And, as we're trading points back and forth on these center objectives, there's only so long we can go, even if I'm winning, before John starts to catch up with that 1 point on every player's turn and then passes me. So part of the reason Warmachine is scenario first right now is play on the flanks and on the peripheries of the board, where less models tend to be dedicated, and that it's generally harder to get models to unless you've committed them to it early. Flanking play is far more consequential, and winning a flank decisively can really turn a game in a way that it never has before. So, I would reckon, again, past Epoch, you'll probably lose a lot of your early games to Assassination. 2024, 2025 kind of scenario paradigm, you really have to be very attentive that your opponent does not get to run away with points. Because it's very easy to accomplish. You only need to engage with a small portion of the battlefield to do it. You got to have a plan to make sure you're getting your points too and at least staying in the fight.
Yeah, and I think a good way to think about it if you're a new player is you've got to play for the end of your turn first, but you also have to play for the end of your opponent's turn, which means, yeah, they may score it, but you have to have things that you can commit to his zones to at least contest it on your turn to keep that equilibrium of you score, I score, you score, I score. Because if you do it right, you would like to set up a situation where I only score on my turn and I'm trying to disrupt you from scoring one thing on your turn, right? That's a good way to win scenario. And what happens, I think, for new players is they're thinking about all these cool shiny toys. They don't want them to die. They are thinking about all the cool things they can kill. And killing stuff is actually kind of a distraction. Yeah, it's important. Attrition is important. It gives you more tools to play the game with. But you can literally win on scenario without killing a model just by running and contesting. There used to be a concept that we used to talk about back in Mark II, where we called it a scenario jam, where people would design their lists just to push everything into the scenario and make you untie it all. And while you were busy like trying to dig out from this mass of models all that are like tough and kind of annoying to kill, that stand back up, whatever. And the reason why that was effective as a strategy is it set the line of engagement such that you were killing stuff, but you were fighting on your side of the board instead of fighting in the middle or fighting on my side of the board. And if you have an opportunity to set the line of engagement on the opponent's side of the board, it helps with scenario play. Because if you look, like, let me see if I can get this framed a little better. If you look at this, these are pretty even, right? But if we're fighting here up by this avalancher, right, which is right here, and all of our fighting is on the top side of the map, you know, that's the line of engagement, that's where we engaged. Like, how are you getting down to this flag in the corner if everything is fighting on that side of the board? You know, if we're on your side of the board, if I'm on Alex's side of the board and I've been really aggressive, he's got to fight through me to get to my scenario pieces. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. Yeah. And actually, I'm going to put on deployment lines here. And this is a practice I've kind of adopted. You know, it started off as teaching new players for me, but it's just metamorphosized into something I do all the time because it's useful to me to vocalize my thought process. Is, you know, talk about, okay, we're going to deploy, you know, you're going first. So you're going to run to, you know, here on your first turn. I'll use this trench marker. You're going to run to here. I'm going to respond. I have to respect your gun threat ranges, so I'm only going to be back here. And then on your next turn, you're going to get here. And then I'm going to have to figure out scenarios. So I have to figure out how to punch through. And, you know, I'll just like, particularly when I'm working with a new player, I'll just vocalize my entire thought process breaking down the board. But sort of how I do it, you know, we have highlighted here these kill box lines. This is your caster should not stand behind this line. And these kill box lines describe where most of the action happens in a game. You know, it's always important to be cognizant of where the scenario objectives are, but just in general, it's a good idea to turn this 24-inch division between the two kill boxes into 3 8-inch segments and just, you know, consider, okay, this is going to be the center of the board. That's typically the territory that's dominated by the first player, or at least they have the largest physical presence in. The back third is where the objectives are that I don't want my opponent to run away with. And the top third are the objectives I want to run away with. You know, so just having like the notions of those like broad theaters of war, like here's where different sets of actions are going to happen.
Yeah. And so I guess what that brings me to is you can't fall in love with your pieces. You have to be willing to put things in your opponent's threat ranges, see what happens. Like, you're better off. I think one of the biggest problems I see with new players, and I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this, Alex, is that they play too timidly into scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And scenario play is not a timid mindset or game. Now, it's not great to like give away your whole army, but I think you'd be surprised if you jammed your whole army in their face, they might not kill as much as you think.
Yeah.
I mean, they might.
Yeah.
If they go ahead, Alex.
Especially if they're using like offensive synergies or, you know, like I'm running a bunch of war beasts that are speed 6 and melee range 1. My war beasts are all 10 inches dangerous, and I don't really necessarily speed that up. And my opponent's got 15 inches on all his war beasts if he uses perdition, and he has ghost walk, and he has bird's eye, and he can just get through everything. So if you start respecting that 15-inch perdition, you know, and you keep your you keep your jack just outside of, you know, 15 inches of my crazy perdition heavy, what's crazy is I know you only have 10 inches this way. So what I can do is just like, I'm just going to get to just outside of 10 inches and I move here. And you have to, and if you try and be respectful of that 15 inches, you now have to give ground and move all the way away from the center third of the board, maybe even away from the back third of the board. Versus, okay, you have these crazy threat ranges, but what if I just put these jacks and these units and this battle engine, like, you're going to run out of gas eventually, and then the survivors are going to make hay. But we've also positioned, now the fighting is, rather than me, meekly retreating to my back third, the fighting is now happening well across the center line. And like, you may kill, like a lot, but I just got to run away with this 40 mil in my bottom third. It's the great writing advice, kill your darlings. If something is too precious, if a character or an idea is too precious, you're never free to pursue the plot to where it goes organically. Likewise, if your pieces are too precious, you may be holding them more precious than the strategic decisions that actually cause you to win the game.
Correct. And another thing, I kind of want to share another concept here, and that is, let's say they have this super duper jack that they can rocket 17 inches across the field, or even 15 inches. 15 inches is a huge threat range, right? You're like, okay, cool. And what does the jack do? Maybe it kills your heavy, but then you just turn around and you have your whole army at your disposal, so you just traded heavy for heavy. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the worst thing in the world to have. I think in Warmachine often is the case that the threat of firing the gun is more powerful than firing the gun. In other words, charging 15 inches with this warjack, probably, there's an element of ruin in it. Like, it could go disastrously bad with your dice. You could roll subpar and just you don't even kill a heavy. So now this heavy gets Old Faithful, is operational for another turn, and your heavy gets killed because it's in the middle of my army, and I can kind of just pick and choose how I want to remove it. And I think the part of the value of having those long threat ranges is actually just threatening areas of the board and forcing your opponent to overreact to it, right? So sometimes you just have to know when, there's this concept in Magic of who's the beatdown. And if you don't have the long threat ranges, you're not the beatdown. I'm sorry. You don't get to attack first. So you got to move up and take it in the face. And then just make sure you counterpunch really hard and play like a catcher's mitt. And some factions are extremely good at that. So,
yep. Yeah, this is maybe not the new player advice necessarily, but a piece of advice I often give is like, a lot of people will ask, what's your maximum threat range? And you will see them, even experienced players, often timidly play around that. And like, I bring up 15-inch threat heavies because I often play Shadow Tongue. I have 4 heavies, every one of which can threat 15 inches in a given turn, and often multiple at once. And then I go like, oh yeah, and I have this War Beast that can also jump and has a range 8 tongue with drag, and I have Gallows. So really it's a 15 inches plus the D6 and maybe the drag and stuff like that. And I know when I'm going to win a game when my opponent starts planning around the absolute maximum threat range, because that moves them to playing way back here. Like, piece of advice I give to players who've got the mechanics down and have the basic strategy down: don't respect maximum threat ranges. Respect the threat ranges that matter, that are consequential.
Yep. And don't be afraid to trade pieces. And like I said,
exactly.
Force your opponent to fire their gun. Because like in Alex's case, there's a lot that can go wrong with a drag, with a perdition. Like, perdition doesn't automatically deal damage. It just doesn't. He can miss the hit roll. I mean, and he's going to do things to minimize the failure points from his side of it too. But the more complicated their plan, the more complicated their Rube Goldberg machine is to get their 15-inch charge or 18-inch charge or 21-inch charge, the more likely a piece of it will fail. Like, it happens all the time. You roll double ones. You know, it's just like it happens.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yep.
The other thing
exactly.
I want to, and we've kind of danced around this and we've kind of illustrated this point, but I think the best way to think about playing the game for scenario for a new player is look at all the objectives. Okay, which one is the easiest for me to score on my turn? Go do whatever you have to do to score that objective. Okay, I'm scoring that objective. Move to the next objective. Rinse and repeat. And you just go from the next easiest to the next easiest to the next easiest until you run out of activations. And that way you're scoring your maximal amount of points. And then just keep an eye on, once you've scored what you can and you look and say, I really can't score that because there's too much stuff there. Be thinking about, how am I going to contest? How am I going to contest so that my opponent doesn't score super easy? Or how can I set up so I can charge next turn to maybe you don't contest it. Maybe you give it to them this turn, but you park yourself within charge range of their objective next turn and force them to deal with you, or come off the objective to deal with you. I mean, there's so many things you can do to sort of push the scenario in your favor. And aggression. I think, be aggressive. I think that's my final advice.
Yeah. I'm gonna just change the scenario here, just to, because the scenario that illustrates the principle best, I think, John, what you said there is absolutely right. And in the spirit of how not to lose, I'm going to start at how to win, but we'll get back to how not to lose. This is focused on getting yourself room to breathe and experience as much of the game as possible. Perhaps the most intense scenario for blowout mechanics is two fronts, because we got this little 30 mil flag somewhere near the center. It's going to glom onto a terrain piece. But, we have these 50 mils off to the side and these 40 mils off to the side, any given pair of which can be worth up to 4 points per turn. So as a veteran, say you're sitting down against me, this is one of your early games. The thought that's going through my head is, okay, which one of these flanks am I going to clear and run away with? And ideally, I'm going to deploy my armies such that I get options on both of them. And I let you do your commitments to either one, and I'll pick whichever's easier to get rid of. Your goal, if you're trying to see as much of the game as possible, is how do I avoid losing on both these flanks at once? And it will cultivate thinking about, how do I prevent my opponent from running away? Because, even for experienced players, runaway scenarios is the leading loss condition right now. It sounds like an introductory tool, but it's a skill that's going to stay with you for the rest of your life. Like, I plan for which of these scenarios am I going to win on, but I have to have a plan for my opponent thinking which one they're going to win on, and making sure I can slow that down enough for me to win on my chosen side.
Yeah, and I guess that brings us, we probably could talk a little bit about list construction ideas that can help you in scenario play, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things I like to think about is there something that I can put on a flank that can also come to the middle and support me in the middle once the flank is overrun, or once I decide the flank is not worth pursuing? So, for example, I play Dusk. So I always put a unit of Dreadguard archers on each flank, which may seem counterintuitive, but both units can fire to the middle, and they could walk 6 and fire 12 or 10. I can't remember.
They're 12, yeah.
So that you've got 18 inches. So literally I can walk and shoot past the halfway point of the board, but I can also walk forward and start peppering their far objective on the flank, right? And I force them to commit, and Dreadguard archers are 13, 16 with 8 boxes. So they're not an easy thing to interact with. You can't put throwaway stuff into them. You got to put real attacks into them to kind of deal with them.
Yeah.
And whichever side ends up being the weaker side, those Dreadguard archers for me will often be on the opponent's side of the board, shooting everything in their backfield and scoring their objective, right? That's happened to me in a lot of games already. The other thing I like to do is I like to do the same thing with cats and their cavalry. Same thing. They have long threat ranges, particularly with Mirage. They have a 14-inch threat range. And if you put some shield guards with them. And again, they can charge to the middle to support me in the middle, as well as dominating a flank. So basically, if I put cats and archers on the outside, they both support the middle. So the middle is still well supportive if I want to push up the middle of the board. But I also have the option to push hard on either flank. So I could collapse one flank hard, and on the other flank move to the middle because I've decided that they've overcommitted over there. I don't want to give my stuff away, right? It just gives you ultimate flexibility, and it sort of illustrates how I think about playing scenario anyway.
Yep. Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up supplementing the archers with cats, particularly if you're looking at flank play. It's almost never enough to have a single module or a single operating unit in the area. You'll generally want 2 at minimum, and the more the better for winning that flank. As a Storm Legion player, both my lists right now include Deuce and the Black 13th. And typically the 2 of them run on the same flank, partially because they have good inherent synergies together, but also because they both present, very disproportionately powerful shooting with good ranges. So even if they're fighting, a limited number of foes on a side, they're good there. But if the situation turns in the center of the board, it is very easy for them to come in and contribute while staying on the objectives they're committed to because they're guns. So, you want multiple elements together. And by the way, if you see me playing Deuce and Black 13th, if they're on a flank, I am probably telegraphing to you that is the flank I intend to win. Just because they're so good at it. But you'll want multiple elements. So like in a lot of scenarios, I'll go Marauder crew backed up by a surgeon and a booty boss who has a hand cannon he can contribute. But I'll also have a second Marauder crew unit waiting nearby that looks like it's ready to rumble in the center. Actually, they're prepared to jump on whatever unit jumped on my Marauder crew that I was counting to fight on that flank, and then wipe them out and take the place of the original unit.
Now, you have more experience than I do. I'm going to ask you a question because I think this is true, but I haven't played enough to verify it. The scenario game is won and lost on the flanks.
100%. Well, not 100%. There are some scenarios that are much more center driven, or scenarios like not split decision. Which one is it? Best laid plans, where the scenario can be heavily flank based or it can be very centralized. Payload, people often describe as centralized. Yes, the flanks are, for the purposes of advancing overall strategic objective of winning the game, far more important than they ever have been before, and are in many cases the most important element. The center of the board is still the tactically most important space because it gives you the most options to come into other quadrants of the board and interact with what's going on there. But often, unless you're having a battle of titans in the center, or there are a lot of scenario elements in the center of the board is mostly a battle over who has a staging area to support their flanks.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. What other list design elements do you consider? One of the things I like to put in my lists, or at least think about, is a far-ranging light jack that I can put into a late game. So it might operate as an arc node early, but late game will go stand on my opponent's objective, and just like, because things have thinned out, they can't get the resources to kill even a light jack over to the flank, and it can be a real game changing sort of, I guess, stalemate breaking sort of play. Did I lose you, Alex? Oh, it looks like he had to step away. Other things I like to put in, ambush units occasionally. Oftentimes I don't ambush them, right? Unless I have a plan for them. Like if there's trains set up such that I can ambush them and put them in a really advantageous position to start pushing the flank without giving a lot away. So ambush units are a consideration. The other thing that's kind of nice, and there aren't a lot of advanced deployment units, but the advanced deployment, the advantage is not in the extra 3 inches of deployment, which, I mean, it does help, but where the advantage is, it allows you to commit your resources after you see what's going on, right? So it allows you to put, like, you deploy, you got kind of an even deployment, you have some advanced deployment units. It's often, okay, I've identified my opponent is seeding this flank. I'll put an extra advanced deployment unit over here to make sure that I win it, or force them to react accordingly, that kind of thing.
Yep. Sorry, the dogs demanded my attention for a moment, but
no problem.
If you hadn't covered it already, I'd like to spin off of, you know, your classification of the far-ranging Jack. For me, this is a category that I call babysitters. You know, so there's scenarios like Payload or others that have elements that are just so far distant from other theaters of engagement that, you know, the models that go over there aren't, you don't necessarily expect them to come back or to be able to recommit to involvement in the rest of the game immediately. Their main job is hold down a scenario thing, and they're offensive and defensive babysitters. So a great offensive babysitter may be a Jack like a Spectre, which has disproportionately high defensive stats and very advantageous rules for fighting low commitment goobers who are like, you know, oh, we're a support unit back here scoring this 40mm objective. And the Spectre walks up and says, the 3 of you have no hope of killing me in 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to turn this off, and then I'm going to kill you and wait for somebody else to show up and take this over.
And a Spectre also has defensive stats such that it's easy for the opponent to misjudge what it takes to kill it, or to have a cascading dice failure and just leave it on a couple boxes so that they just don't score something that they should have scored on their turn, again, breaking that scenario stalemate.
Yep, exactly. A Direwolf or a Drakion are also really good offensive babysitters. You know, you let them go out of the main environment. Their main goal is to turn something off. Defensive babysitters, typically you're looking for them to turn something on. Great example of defensive babysitters. I mean, I already kind of gave my Deuce and Black 13th example, but another really good one is Ulcor Barragers in Orgoth. So they have range 12, POW something, AoE 14. Something blast guns. Like, their exact numbers aren't terrifically important, other than when you get hit by them, you know you've been hit. And because they're AoEs, they're pretty good against units. They also have reposition. So what they can do is, like, if you've got an objective or a flag that needs to be babysat by a unit, they hang out back there. Maybe they can range a bit forward and contribute their guns to the fight and then back up with the reposition. They're also 8 boxes and a pretty respectable armor. So, like, just like Dreadguard archers, you're not going to kill them for free. And if your opponent attempts to make a low effort commit to Ulcor Barragers, like, oh, I have this skirmishing ambush unit or something like that, like single wound guys, or, you know, even excellent skirmishers like Marauder crew that happen to be really vulnerable to those guns, the Ulcor Barragers are like, cool, we're going to gun you all down and continue babysitting. You know, be on the lookout for units that give you that run away with the thing on my third of the engagement zone. Defensive and offensive babysitters, I think, are a big deal.
I like that a lot. I actually use sniper teams from Dusk for the same thing, because they have reposition 3 and range 14. So they're great for scoring a back flag. And again, they can walk up and then repo back into guarding your flag. When, like, I think on Wolves, the flag is in the back usually. Had great success with that. Plus, they bring a solid ranged attack with a lot of options. So they're great. I just want to highlight a quick comment.
Phantom Seeker. They can even be like, take all those rules we applied to casters, like, oh, keep them out of range, keep them out of line of sight. You can do the same thing with ghost snipers, and they can still keep shooting no matter what.
That is also true, which I quite like. So I just want to take a second to welcome David. He said he played Warmachine since the end of Mark 1.
Hey.
Was always terrible. I don't remember that, David, because I think I've seen you play. I don't think you were terrible. But I'm glad you're here, and it's really good to see you. I missed you, buddy. So
yeah, welcome back.
Yep. And I just want to point out that post comments, we'll integrate them into the show. We'll probably take some time to sort of break it off and talk about those things because we think they're important. Is there anything else that you want to mention about scenario play?
I could keep going on this for, another like hour easy. But if we're really focusing on, okay, you're new to Warmachine, we're going to teach you how to win, start by not losing. I think we covered some of the really important core principles and some bonus topics on top of that. So, I don't necessarily want to overcrowd the brain with more than is actionable one step at a time.
It's true. Like I did think about running a 2-hour show. It might be information overload. But then I thought back to Muse, and a lot of those were 4-hour shows. So
yeah,
you guys are getting it in half the time with visual aids, which we didn't have back then.
Ooh.
Yeah. So let's.
Yeah. Nobody talks about like, you got to have carpenter's eye back in the day, but you also have to like be able to spin, like rotate multiple apples in your mind to kind of talk about play state. And boy, was that like a mental workout listening to really in-depth strategic podcasts. Like, oh, it's so much more accessible now that we can just put a war table thing on screen and say like, exactly this. It looks like this.
Yeah, I remember back in the day. I mean, we would talk about positioning, right? And we would describe the things that we showed tonight. And it would take a lot, like that bunker that I showed with the 2 heavies. It would take a lot to explain that, and then I'm like, I'm not even sure if people are getting this. Probably not. Mm-hmm. Like, there were many times when we would talk about a concept like that, and then somebody would hit me up at a convention. Can you just show me that on the table? And I would be like, yeah, just position your guys like this. And then, you're pretty safe, or enliven corridors or whatever else. All right. Well, we got like 15 more minutes. How about we, for new players, add a new segment to the show, which is kind of a getting better strategy that we'll just end every show with. Does that sound good, Alex?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm curious what you mean by this.
Well, for example, one of the things that you can do to get better if you go to conventions, right, and you start playing games, a lot of first-time convention goers, they they would go to events without thinking about how they're going to be hydrated, feed themselves, keep their mental acuity up. All of those things are not things that are cognizant for anybody in their mind when they're going to their first convention. But savvy tournament players have figured out, okay, this is when I'm going to get food. I'm going to bring this with me so I can drink something. I have my ibuprofen in the bag. I've planned out so that I get some sleep because I play terrible when I don't get. I mean, all of these, it's kind of like going to a sporting event. You have to have your body right and your mind right to perform well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Man, there's a lot of tips. You gotta follow the Oracle of Delphi's advice. Like, you gotta really know yourself here. But you do need to be physically attentive to your, you have to be attentive to your physical well-being in order to manifest your best play.
Yeah.
One of the things for me, for instance, thinking heavily burns a lot of calories and consumes a lot of energy. If I'm like at an event that I'm really invested in, like a team tournament or something like that, where there's, a lot on the line, as it were, like I don't want to disappoint my teammates plus my usual ambition to do well. I will take steps to conserve my mental energy, like food, water, etc. But one of the big things for me is, my game's done. I'm going to stop spending mental energy. I am just going to walk out the hall. I'm not going to watch anybody's games. I'm not going to talk about the games. I'm just going to rest and recuperate.
I think that's a good point. I wanna highlight something that Stephen Williams put up here. Back in the day, we played Warmachine doing mental trigonometry, which is true. You did a ton of it. You'd measure, like, I'm going to measure to this model in my control range and this model in my control range, a little Pythagorean theorem. I can now take the delta and figure out what, the distance to this model is, and blah, 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 right? We did a lot of that and a lot of estimation. And we did play in the snow uphill both ways, 100%. All of us old farts would agree with that 1,000%. So thanks for sharing.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, that's one thing that's changed a lot about the experience of the game is, and part of it's like cons and the changing nature of the tournament circuit. A lot of big tournaments these days are 2-day. I remember back in the day, you were going to a big tournament, it was 5 or 6 or 7 rounds in one day. And the last 3 rounds or so were like, this is an endurance sport.
100%. 100%. Yeah. I mean, there was times by the time like the top 8 would roll around and I would have taken such bad care of myself because I'm just like kind of a social butterfly. So I'd hang out all night. I'd go to bed at 4 a.m. after drinking sortilege, which is dangerous, by the way. The Canadians, you think the Canadians are being your friends offering your sortilege, right? Which is maple flavored whiskey. Like think about drinking whiskey that tastes like syrup, maple syrup. It's delicious. It's sweet. It's amazing. It doesn't taste much like alcohol, so you don't realize how drunk you're getting. But really what they're doing is they're trying to soften you up for the next day so that you can't play well. It's a very clever con on the Canadians' part, and I'm tired of it. I'm calling them out.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I think that it's important. And I guess the other thing I want to say really quick is if you do want to get better, just go to local steamrollers. I mean, I'm going to tell you to go to conventions, but I know that's a much bigger commitment. But if you go and you get 3 or 4 games in one day, and you're going to see a diversity of lists, you're going to see things that you don't see at your local game night. Because a lot of times steamrollers are a little more regional, right? So if you go to a steamroller, you may see people from 40, 50, 100 miles away pretty easy. And that's going to broaden your horizons. The more things you see, the better you'll get faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Tournaments are great because you're iterating. Like, there's a bunch of cognitive science that tells you, like, if you want to get better, play at tournaments. But the big one is you're iterating quickly. Like, you're seeing something, experiencing it, and then immediately enacting the feedback you received from your last exercise. You are also seeing more. But really, the iteration makes such a big difference. And, like, I know some people get like new to the game, got 100 points, been playing 100 points for a little bit, but I don't know if I'm ready for a tournament or something like that. Nah, you're ready. One, it's a great learning experience, and 2, like, presumably you got into this game because you enjoyed it. Like, isn't it pretty freaking great to have an excuse to take a whole day to just play games and to be around other people who are very excited to play games? And like, it's a bit like models being precious. Sometimes people get wrapped around the axle like, oh, entry fee is like $5, $10. And it's like, I would pay $5 to, or $10 to go and hang out with my friends and do one of my favorite things. And I don't care if I win a single game. But more beyond that, like, it is one of those things, like, it's a little investment to add spice. Just to add a little pinch of like, I want to do well.
Yeah, well, and I'm going to say this probably every episode because I believe it. Everybody goes to their first convention to compete. I want to measure where I'm at. I want to compete with all these big dogs that I've heard about. I want to see how good I am. I want to try to win. After that, all that continues, don't get me wrong, but the most important thing becomes, man, I want to go hang out with those guys. It's so much fun. And people sort of develop their own cliques, but then there's a lot of mixing and matching and sort of, you see some of this, there's kind of a crowd that you sort of just get used to that travels to all the big conventions, and you see each other, and then you talk about these amazing games that you had, or you share stories about, what I'm sure we have a lot of stories we could share. We could talk about the time that Josh Max and who was the other person? doing Drunk Machine with Josh. I can't believe I can't remember who that was, but I've never seen people so drunk playing Warmachine. And then Josh literally went and puked in a trash can and did a puke and rally and came back and played a couple more hours. It was incredible.
Oh man, we had 2022. We had Josh, not Maxon, St. Louis Josh, versus Justin at Drunk Machine overnight. They both had the buckets next to them. Justin said, "I'm going to play this game." The rest of us are like, "Yeah, we're going out for barbecue." We had a great meal. We went out, had some fantastic barbecue. Justin asked us to bring him something back. So like, the mac and cheese here was really good. Can we get mac and cheese to bring back to Justin? Justin was blitzed when we walked back in an hour and a half later. So blitzed that, we had forgotten that he's lactose intolerant, but he was so drunk that he had forgotten he was lactose intolerant.
Oh no.
He didn't have, we didn't get any kind of utensils. He didn't have any kind of utensils. So he's there using his 13 and 14-inch measuring stick as chopsticks to feed himself mac and cheese out of this carry-out container. Oh man, it was fun.
UA, did I say all that right? I don't know how to say that, but for the record, you only did that trig if you were good at the game. Some people were good at guessing ranges, and the follow-up was me. I didn't either, which I could completely respect and understand. Sometimes you just got to do it live, right? You're just like, I'm going to move forward and cool. And then I think this is a really good point. You can also sign up for one of the War Table leagues if you're looking to get more practice and cannot get to a lot of events. I do think that is a big advantage for new players. Yeah. You can play War Table. Now, I will say War Table is not a 1-to-1, in my opinion. There are some things that are very different because of it's like a video game, right? You know all the ranges instantly. There's just a lot of ranges that you don't think to check or don't have time to check all the ranges for everything. So you can play more perfectly on War Table than you can in real life, I think. And so that's not necessarily. Jay. Okay, I'll remember that. So yeah. Anyway, but it is good practice, especially for new lists or models that you don't own.
Yep. Yeah. And just doubling down on the War Table is different. Again, it's another cognitive behavioral thing. Even measuring ranges is a bit of a different skill on War Table versus tabletop. So I've not been playing a lot of War Table recently. Earlier this week, Travis absolutely got me because when I'm playing a game at the tabletop, I okay, maximum threat ranges. This malefactor goes this many inches. So I put down my stick and all right, this is the line to stand outside of, and all that. On War Table, you have to be a little bit more you have to have the model and be checking the ranges to things around it, and it just cycles through a different part of your brain. So I'm oh yeah, Kane can just come up and look at me, I'm the big boss of this game. I'm gonna walk forward here and cast these spells here. Oh crap, Kane's within 13 inches of a malefactor. No, what have I done?
And then Kane got 8.
Kane got 8. Yeah.
That is the only good Kane. In the belly of a malefactor. Yeah, I like that idea a lot, actually, to be honest with you. The other thing, I guess, to circle back to our discussion earlier, I want to see what you think about this. But one of the things that I find really, really important about going to even just local steamrollers and experiencing the game, what you can do, and maybe I'm a degenerate for this, but when I was learning the game, when I would go and I would lose a game, if I would win a game, I probably wouldn't review it quite as hard. But when I would lose a game, I would think through the game and well, what could I do different to change the outcome of this game? What could I put in my list? And then I would look at their cards and say, okay, what did they miss? And I would just be, I would just be a degenerate thinking about the game, trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do different next time? How am I going to deploy? How am I going to move? What's actually important? What do I need to focus on? What do I need to worry about? What are the, just blah, 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 think. And you get, to me, that's that's the fun part about the game. Like getting to think about it, getting to build lists, getting like building my lists and adjusting my lists is by far my favorite part. My favorite part of the game, bar none. So,
yeah, man. So you sprung this segment on me this week. I'll spring. I really like this topic, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. So, hopefully next week, if we have time, at the end, we can talk about what I call the mastermind versus curator theory of development.
oh, I'm interested.
And it's mostly centered on this process of review. I am someone who asserts like most of your mental effort, like you should put a lot of mental effort into playing your game effectively, but that should be dwarfed by the amount of mental effort you spend in reflecting on your game, because that's actually where a lot of the growth comes from. Something that did not exist, quite as accessibly when we were both like, in the Mark II days, keeping playback tapes. You would see guys who would, bring GoPros and rigs and set up, streaming tables or record games and stuff like that. But being able to watch and review your game after the fact is a massive, massive aid. Something that makes it way easier. Everybody has one of these. Almost everybody also has an old one of these sitting in a drawer. Turns out if this was produced after like 2016, 2018, the camera on this is better than most commercial cameras you would get under like pro level stuff. You can get a cheapo tripod and your old one of those and like maybe connect it to an external hard drive and just record your games for playback tape purposes. Even if you're not doing like YouTube battle reports, for me, particularly when I was developing into, getting into the circuit and performing well, I kept playback tapes all the time and I'd review them a couple of times, and it was really, really useful for me leveling up quickly.
Along those lines, I just had a thought, and I've been thinking about this recently because when I came up in Mark II, you didn't really carry it. Like I remember when I got my first smartphone and then I started building lists while I was on the toilet, and I thought it was the best thing ever. Right. But, you just didn't carry a smartphone. So when I came up, it didn't really occur to me, but you don't even have to take a video. If you just take a picture of like before the start of your turn and then at the end of your turn to give you a mental reminder of what you moved and sort of what got removed and what didn't. You can even take pictures of specific things, specific positioning that you want to think about a little better, right? Like, I'm not sure if I did that right. Let me take a picture of it. It takes seconds to take a quick snapshot. You can also do that during your opponent's turn because, they're moving models, they're thinking, they're in the tank, whatever. Taking a few pictures of your positioning and where you put things would really help you go back through the game for review purposes, because you have this visual aid of like, oh yeah, that's right. I put that guy out there like a donkey. Like I don't know what that guy was doing. And then it'll help reinforce the idea of, okay, next time, I'm going to put this model out here, but maybe not quite that far. Right. Let's go to, I found a wild Corey Doyle. Did you see Corey was in here?
I did. Yes.
Coyle said, Corey, sorry, Corey. By the way, I miss your magnificent red beard. I have found Wartable frustrating. I struggle to focus on the game because of all the distractions at my house and how much information you can get from Wartable. I think I agree with you, Corey. And Jay also kind of backed that up. He said this. Probably a me thing, but games in person are much more enjoyable for me. I don't know that anybody would ever argue with that. The game is, there's a tactile portion of it that makes the game much more fun. So.
Yeah. War table games tend to be a little clinical, provided you're not making dummy mistakes like me. But the in-person thing is great.
Okay. Well, it's now 10 p.m. Friendly reminder, if we get to 500 subs, I'm going to add a third hour to this podcast or stream.
Oh my God.
I don't know how.
Thank goodness we're not there yet. My bladder could not take an extra hour today.
You could always could take a little break. So again, if you haven't subbed, please give us a subscription. Again, if I get to 500, I'm moving to a third hour, just as a celebration. And because I love talking about this game, I want to get more people on here during the live so we can be a little more interactive with the chat. I'd love to bring somebody up. So if any of you guys would ever like to jump on the show, I can send you a link and you can jump on, and we'll just have a discussion about whatever you're thinking about. I think the real value, and maybe if Alex and I say something that doesn't make sense, I'm just going to say that the real value is if you ask a question that shows that maybe we weren't clear or didn't explain something really well, it really helps us to go back and clean up what we said to make it more understandable and a little bit easier for everyone. So you really do us a service if it really helps us, and we would really appreciate it if you just asked a question and said, hey, this didn't make any sense to me. Can you please explain that again? We're happy to do it. Also, if we're going to fill 3 hours, we're going to need your help. just being honest.
Oh man, no, I'm pretty sure we've got plenty of room to bloviate. Even this outline, like we got through it a bit ahead of time, but we had to drop multiple bookmarks in there. Like I can keep going on this. We're moving on.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, peace and love, everyone. We love you. We'll see you next week. Same time, 8 to 10 Eastern time, every Tuesday night, just so that we don't have to talk about news and announcements because they're always the day after. So, all right.